But what Vince had stated is that those funds continue to be earmarked for the county. The county commission has stated that those continue to be earmarked for the city of Port Richey, so he did not foresee that changing, right? So that in the nutshell, and then the other thing was that he felt that the Port Authority could bring some things to the table around the whole dredging exercise, given where the city is now. So that's the conversation with Mr. Lupo. Any questions on that piece? I'll just open it up here.
None for me.
No.
Okay. So the second, oh, I'm sorry.
Did you say that they were supposed to?
Could you make Sal happy so he doesn't yell at me?
Sherry Share, 7802 Davis Street. Did you say that we were supposed to get some sort of funding for the DMMA site and we didn't?
What my understanding of the whole situation was that there was a waterfront project that was initially moved forward to the restore process. And the DMMA site and the dredging of 19 were all part and parcel of that package. The way this funding typically worked is that, and this is the way in government typically, is that the local entity will pay for what needs to be done and they'll get reimbursed from the higher entity. In this case, it would have been the federal government or the overseer of the restore funds. That reimbursement did not take place for those things that have been done, the DMMA and Channel 19 and all the accoutrements that went with that. The city paid for that 100% out of CRA.
So there's no way they're going to reimburse us for that? That's water under the bridge?
No, the 667 was intended to pay for that. There has not been a formalized request to say, now we want the 667. And my interpretation is that's our opportunity. This forum can help decide that.
Okay. All right.
Does that help?
Thank you.
Certainly. Okay, so number 2 was to get in front of City Council and understand what their priorities were. So went in front of them last week and had some input. Mr. Kinsella didn't have anything specifically. Mr. McClary really broached the idea as far as getting the Port Authority Board involved on the dredging issue. And basically, he thought if we had regular discussions for the board, meeting citizens, getting input, understanding the concerns that are out there in the community, understanding what potential sources of funding, not only the Restore, but others that may be out there, and really finding the best way for citizens to, or others to pay for this. The question is how it's going to end up being paid for. And then the other thing he made available to us was the bids that we had received. There were several bids that the cities received for dredging, and we don't physically have those yet, but I thought it may be prudent to get those so we can look at that, and then along with the engineering design information that we had from the last meeting, that might be helpful background for us to do some assessment on. So that was Mr. McClary. And then Mayor Tremblay, he had mentioned that he had attended the recent Restore Act meeting. They were having discussions about Gulf Harbor dredging and the Hudson dredging. And so he participated in that. He had some positive feedback from them around that. Again, talking about the funding issue. And he stated that's really the biggest challenge. It really depends on what kind of chunks you want to bite off, what your priorities are, those types of things. We talked about stormwater, so there's multiple sources that could potentially come in here. He wanted us to potentially engage the county further because there's some new players there, there's a new engineer, so there's some fresh ideas on how we may be able to go along this. He encouraged that perhaps using this medium as a place for citizens workshops would be beneficial. And also, well, that goes back to the county a little bit, that they have these new grant writers. Got a little ahead of myself, I'm sorry. That could help through this process. And then Ms. Sorrell had mentioned that she thought that the Port Authority Board was a great place for this to be as a matter of course going forward. So the main thing was finding other funding options and also determining community prioritization of what dredging people would want, or what channels people would want, or anything around dredging. So that was my takeaway from the feedback that I got, and that information is on the YouTube videos, so you can take a look at it as well if you haven't already. But that was the takeaway that I had. So with that, I will open it up to questions or thoughts. Or
My first question is, the previous dredging we've already done and paid for, that's owed to us out of the BP fund money from the county now, right? The $667,000?
to be offset by, I think, I don't remember the exact terms, if it was like a 1 to 3, because we were putting in like 200 and it was two.
Right.
So I don't know if there's a ratio there, but yes, there's some
So
reimbursement.
I guess the first point would be, we need to get reimbursed before we start, so we can use that money, because do I understand the grant process is the city outlays the money, does the project, and then gets reimbursed back?
For, and you're stretching my flight envelope a little bit, for that particular situation, that was how that worked. Other funding sources may be somewhat different.
Okay,
But for that one, though, we just haven't been reimbursed by the county at this point. Those funds
right.
are there.
That's my understanding.
So does this body need to initiate the request, or is that already in process?
Don't have an answer for you on that.
well, if I would request someone get refunded the money, because that's our future dredging. We have to have money to start. I make a motion.
Well, no. I was looking for a motion. It was more, I was looking at this more of a discussion period. So with that, okay, in mind, what do you think about a path to move forward? Okay, so part of that path to go forward, if I'm hearing you correctly, certainly, is to make sure we got reimbursed minimally that part of the restore funds. But my question is, what else?
So we've got permits that expire basically at the end of this year, right?
October,
October.
DEP.
So I would think that you'd have parallel paths. You'd have the request for the reimbursement so that we have money coming in, and that it's prioritizing out of, and I can't remember what the total budget for, we can't possibly do all of what we're permitted for by October of 2020. I don't think there's
No.
funds for that. We can certainly pie in the sky, do, engage with the grant writers and get every possible request to find as much money as we can. But I think the next step would be to prioritize what of those permits, what's number one, what's number two, what's number three, and then once we get reimbursed, we see what the city can afford to do, what the reimbursement monies would cover, and then we just have a water line that this is what we can afford to do. If it's three of the projects, or 6 or 12, it's just the math at that point would
And
suggest the path forward.
I think we need to look at some of the permits, because some of the ones where I know they did the first channel because that was where the spoils were. So of course you had to use that one. The other one was supposed to go in front of Hooters, waterfront, and into the bayou. Well, that's a channel that is used by a lot of people versus one canal.
Yes.
So my suggestion would be use the dredging that's going to benefit more of the citizens, not someone's personal canal. And then once we get that done, if we get grant money, then we can start choosing canals in a section and working that way. But I think the main canals or the main channels is what we need to do first.
Well, I guess both of those are along the line of what I was thinking. And let me throw out something as far as a thought, and then I'm going to go back in a little history, because when we, the city, ceased really proceeding on the dredging, the point that was at was who's going to pay for it. So the discussion on the table was there was going to be some rationale, some study to say you have 100 feet of seawall and you're on a canal, you would be assessed just like a road in your community, was my understanding at that time. So to your point, where we have a channel that is shared, let's just take channel 1, because that's yet to be done. All right? The entire water Miller's Bayou basin really benefits from channel 1. Okay? So should those landowners be assessed there, or should it be paid for some other way? So one of the thoughts I had is there an opportunity here to really say, hey, how should this be paid? Are there different combinations depending on what the situation is? If you have a private canal, should it be this way? If it's a more public canal, should it be that way? So like Bay Boulevard, from a road assessment standpoint, I don't know if that is considered a main where the people on there get assessed, or because of Sand Pebble and Harbor Isles and some of these other places, maybe the city, maybe that doesn't happen for that. I know it doesn't happen for US 19.
Right.
All right. So to me, it seemed like an opportunity there, because if we go out in the community, you know, one person says, hey, I need this, I really want it, it's important to me. The next person you talk to, no flipping way am I going to do that, okay?
Right.
So another piece of this puzzle, I thought, is maybe we can do some type of community outreach to see how important is this to you. So for example, nowadays we have a different billing system, and we just happen to know the guy that oversees that. Perhaps we could do an insert in that on a questionnaire to the citizens to say, and we put a SMART questionnaire together, okay? How important is this to you? What are you willing to do? And we could glean some information for citizen outreach, all right? And find out, hey, it's really important here, and then we could even do it from the standpoint, instead of mailing it in and incurring a cost, bring it by the city hall and drop it off in this response box, and we could really gain some insight from that. Right. So then we could kind of get a feeling of, okay, how much money do we have that could pay for this? These other things, it really isn't fair to have everybody pay for, but maybe a certain set. So I think there's potential for lots of different flavors given the complexity, and I was going to propose maybe we should try to investigate that to some extent, if that seemed reasonable from y'all's perspective, in parallel with what other types of fundings are there? Are there grant pieces? What exactly are we talking about on this 667?
Right.
Is it what we're entitled to, the city's entitled to, I would like it to be us, but the city's entitled for reimbursement of 150,000 of that? I don't know, but we can work through that process.
I thought originally 667 was part of Port Richey's portion of the BP money.
That's my understanding.
So if we, and I thought we used the whole thing for the channels we did, and we're supposed to get reimbursed that back, because that's a start for other things. Channel 1 runs in front of Hooters out to in front of Waterfront Park into the bayou. You also, going back to what you said, you have the shrimp boats sitting on Channel 1. Every one of those slips, they collect money, the state does, through land lease. So they're paying land lease for those slips, so they're using the channel. So that's something, is it part of whoever owns seaside property rents the slips out to the shrimpers, and in return, they have to pay the state a portion of rental for doing that. So is the property owner liable for pitching in some money since they're renting everything out?
And
I think I can shed some light on that.
okay,
Whenever you're ready.
go ahead. We're easy.
Nick Overbeck, 8100 Brighton Drive. So I'm going through that process right now, and I am aware that as the owner of the property, you go into a land lease with the state and pay that per X amount of square footage of dockage and decking space. So every year, just from what our conceptual plans are, we'll be paying an initial fee of $700 plus our size to our concept is going to be $600 a month through the state for the land lease. So as a landowner, we would pay that, not the people renting the dock space. But yes, I would suggest somebody pursuing that through the state to see if we can touch some of that money. And then while I'm up here, if I can bother you for a couple other things, the 667 does not have an expiration date, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay, the permits do. If we do not get these permits renewed, clarify this for me. The 667, we should be getting reimbursed as a city. We are not at the county's mercy for that. We should be recouping these funds. So as of right now, they're our funds sitting in a county escrow account, if you will.
That's fair.
But we are not at the county's mercy. We should be recouping these funds to do with as we please, in perspective to the waterfront district, correct?
I agree.
Okay, so if we do not get these permits renewed, where do these funds go? Has anybody looked into that? And while we're pursuing reimbursement, maybe we should pursue another extension.
I think you hit the nail on the head in kind of the conversation up here. There's parallel paths that need to be run. And the permits have always been run separately, and they've always been watched to make sure they didn't fall off the cliff. So I think there's a realization from at least the council last week that they recognize we probably won't get heavy traction before October. So that will have to be an extension. They don't perceive it being an issue because our core permits go to 2023. So usually for waterways type issues, at least historically, the state has deferred to the core as far as that goes.
Okay, yeah, that clarifies that, but in the aspect of we should have workshops and everything else, we should be doing it in-house here in Port Richey and not barking up the county's tree because the funds are coming back to us.
The impression that I have is that there is no clear, concise vision of what the city wants to do. So there are certainly...
The bids are county bids or our bids?
The bids came to us for the last round that gave us some detailed information but never got off the block.
Sought by the county or sought
City.
by
By
the
the
city? Okay.
Right, so we have those for reference. Depending on how we want to proceed, we can use those as a reference, which I thought, because they probably won't be viable, but at least there'll be something to look at that we haven't seen, because we're learning through this process too. But then what we need to do is kind of figure out what are our priorities. If those went out for channels 26A and 1 and something else, maybe as we go through this process, that's not the priorities that we discover from the community. So that's kind of that other parallel path. So one of my thoughts were to let's get some conceptual consensus on where we think is a viable deal, and then going forward, put that together with some potential timeframes, and then see how that works from our perspective. Is a thought.
Okay. Yeah, Jack Mariano's been vocal about trying to help us get funds for this, and I want to make sure it's additional funds to the 667,
Yes.
Supp-
not our 667.
Supposedly, 667 is BP oil money.
Right.
And it is earmarked for water.
Earmarked and put in our account are separate
Yeah.
things.
I know, but I mean, they can't go off and use it for anything else.
Okay.
I think the good thing that I felt better coming into this meeting at versus going to meet with the city about, because I didn't know, was that there is a belief within the city that, and an understanding with the county, because the feds handed this over, that those funds aren't going anywhere except to Port Richey.
Hopefully the county can be helping us get more funds.
And
Yes.
that would be
Okay.
the ideal, and
Beautiful.
I'm
Thank you.
hoping that there's federal funds, state funds,
And county funds.
core
Potentially.
funds, you name it, Swift Mud funds. I mean, if we just let our
Okay.
wheels turn.
Thank you for clarifying. I
So-
appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. I may be cautiously optimistic, but, I think there's a lot of potential. But I think the realization is that this is such a complicated thing to really get the monies, and everything that I've dealt with on the government funding level is for things that you want above and beyond, it's a headache.
One last thing, then I don't have to bother you anymore.
Yeah.
Did anybody bring it to council any kind of fund creating using Nick's Park? I know we discussed at the last meeting. We said even an honesty box or something to that nature. Was that even brought up?
Not other than our last meeting, but
Okay.
I've always been passionate, and most of the boating arenas nationally have been funds that are for boating are intended to stay for boating. So anything that we could get from that standpoint, launch fees, parking fees, or any of that stuff.
Yeah, I know there's been talk about it, and they said they couldn't find anything cost effective, but it costs about $20 to put an honesty box out
Yeah.
there, you know, just for the time being.
Right.
If we get anything, it helps, you know?
Right. So,
I like your idea about reaching out to the public on their interest on the canals. My only point would be is it's almost like unless we do the main channels first, it's like paving your driveway, but you got a dirt road getting there. If you don't have the channel for the people to get out Miller's Bayou because it's so shallow, what good does it do to do their channels before that? So I think public channels first, then reach out for the citizens to see what interest they have on their canals and go that route.
Well, I think I like the way Carl said it. There might be a multitude of ways to get there.
Right.
And if what we can afford to do is only these public canals and these public canals fall below the water line and we can't afford it, are citizens willing to pay an assessment for some public canals to be dredged as well, right? I think that's what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
There might have to be a combination.
there's
of,
so many possibilities.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer.
Right.
But I'm willing to float it out there because I know how I received paving, okay? Because what I was told by the county was you pave this road appropriately and then we'll maintain it. And then you come back in and say, well, you need to pay for it again because us maintaining it only means we're going to take your money and we're going to bill you back again for paving it over in 20 years. I'm like, wait a minute, where are my tax dollars going? I mean, I thought you were holding that back so you could pay for that stuff. So the whole tax process is a little perturbing from my standpoint.
Right.
But I think if we can figure out some creative ways around this, because I don't think there's any rules written. So I don't think we're encumbered by some of the political baggage out there. And if we reach out to the community directly and say, hey, Nick, what are you interested in? And hey, what are you interested in? And we can garner some input from people, that's really powerful. And I think that'll get the city's attention, that'll get the county's attention, and I think we can do it smartly for relatively inexpensive. And I get the sense from the city that if you said, hey, I want Sal to put an insert into the mailing, and this is what I'd like it to look at, that's going to be relatively inexpensive, and this is how it's going to work, and we're going to start soliciting feedback on that. We'll put something together. We'll hold Port Authority Board meetings. One of the things on the agenda will be around some topic around dredging. Don't know what it is. What I would ask for from the group up here, and really the citizens too, if there's particular topics that you think we could talk about for 10 minutes or 15 minutes over a meeting here and a meeting there, let's just understand where people's heads are around this stuff. Because what may be important to Chris isn't important to Ron. And I don't know what that is.
Right.
So, and I think it's going to be different for everyone to some extent. So that was my takeaway on that as far, because I thought this was a big nut because of certainly all the news that's been around this. So I was a little angst saying that, oh yeah, we'll take this on. But I think we've got a little bit of background. I think we can bring a fresh eye to it with the help of the community on what would you like, what's important.
Sure.
So if that makes sense, what I would suggest for next meeting, and probably part and parcel of the agenda, is putting together some topical areas that we could potentially talk about. And if you guys want to send those to me for consolidation, then we'll get them to Sal on the next agenda. And I think if we have let's just say 10 minutes on a particular aspect, that allows us to get a couple under our belt, see how it goes, and then get smarter as we move along. And then what can do, if you got ideas as far as the bigger framework, because the bigger framework of how we believe we want to take dredging forward, I would like to send that to council and say, okay, based on your request, here's our general framework we're thinking about. Okay, and just we can either figure out how to get it to them. I don't know if it requires a topical discussion or just route it to them. Here's what we came away with is our path forward. Is this in line with what your thoughts are? Yay, nay, or hey? So,
Agreed.
it's good?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or any other thoughts that come to mind? I tried to recollect everything that I had gotten from the council and Mr. Lupo, and I think I did okay. But you good?
Good.
with that? Okay. So that is the dredging component in response to my actions from last time. I did not, the couple of topics that we talked about as far as some of the hazards in Miller's Bayou and stuff, I did not get that forward at the last meeting because that was not really the primary intention, but I would be happy to get those things forward on other issues. But the other part tonight that I thought would be important is, what do you guys want to do? I mean, it's fine satisfying council, but you talk to people out there all the time, and our charge is in addition to that. So are there things that you're passionate about or you would like to talk about, and we can make sure that those things get addressed as well as we move forward during this process?
So specifically on the hazards in the bayou, the PVC that's got the rebar, down in it, who placed it? Was it? I know that was placed. The council, Port Authority placed it, or the city did?
It's part of the dredging process.
It's part of dredging.
So they're probably not accurate at this point, right? Do they need
we
to
don't know.
stay?
Well, in the packet that you received last time, it basically identifies those as making sure that any dredging that takes place
Doesn't get into those
into the
protected areas.
in the
yeah.
protected areas, okay? But there's also a piece on the permits that says you need to remove those within 30 days of, ceasing and desisting. So I think as a general follow-up, we need to,
Could we make a motion for them or just a suggestion for them to just place the PVC back over the rebar?
or remove it altogether. I mean, if you follow the terms of the contract or the permit,
But then they'll just have to do it over again when they,
when we finally decide to move forward.
right, so.
Well, from a navigation standpoint, I prefer them to be gone because they're unmarked. And-
Well, if they
Yeah.
put the PVC back over again, then they're marked.
Well, I mean, they're unmarked from the standpoint of a chart.
Right.
And certainly Miller's Bayou is a wake zone, so
Yeah.
you can be clipping along, and certainly, I don't know if they're within the 200-foot boundary or not.
Yeah, I don't know exactly if I thought they only went for channel 1, which is
I've seen them all the way around.
in the
26.
bayou?
Yeah.
Okay, well then,
That's
yeah.
why I was nervous.
Yeah, I would definitely.
And I heard somebody jet skiing there. And
How did they come up with those areas? Were they surveyed?
Yeah, the 26 is all surveyed. I don't know if they went into any canals. They may have been down by 19 when they did that.
Well, then my point would be is if we spent money, again, to survey this, don't know how much we spent, and then if we just rip it out, then we're just gonna pay money to survey it is it that much to just put the PVC back over the top?
So we believe that something should be done about
Right,
those
they
marks.
can't stay the way they are now.
Yeah,
Okay.
they can't
But
stay the way they are. It's-
for me, it just seems like they just throw money out there, and I don't know how much they paid for it, but surveying is not cheap.
Well, if
And
they're-
to
if
just
they're on
pull
the
them
same-
out
yeah.
because the PVC fell off, you put PVC right back over them, and let's get this dredging going.
Okay, so, Chris, do you have anything to add on that, or?
No, they either need to be clearly marked or they need to be removed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm good with either way as long as something's done. So do I have a motion that we'd like to,
I have a motion that they either mark them properly with the PVC pipe, or if they're not going to do that, pull the rebarb out.
Yes. Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so I'm good on that. That's kind of old business a little bit. Other things that are of interest to you, why you got on board besides arm twisting and stuff like that?
I've been on this dredging since day one. It's just, I'd just like to see something get done.
Yeah.
I mean, like most of the residents here, we started this probably 12, 13 years ago. We've gotten one channel done and we didn't get our money back. So we just need to get this rolling, give them some guidance. Again, I think it's great to find out what the people want, because who knows, we could get all these questionnaires back and most people say, I'm happy with my canal, I don't want anything done. We don't know. But I think we just need to get it rolling and give our council what the people want and help them get it going. Again, I've been here forever and I've been sitting on this board forever, and we got one channel done and we didn't get any money from it. So, you know.
And it greatly impacts the waterfront. I mean.
Yeah, and the waterfront is the main reason why most of the people are here.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
all those businesses aren't there because they're all for the waterfront.
Yep.
So yeah, let's give them some guidance and help them out as much as we can.
Okay. Other areas that you're interested in? or-
I really like the idea of raising funds at Nick's Park for the boat ramp.
Yes, that's another good idea.
You know, as an ongoing source of income.
Okay.
And at
Just
one,
even if it's just to upkeep the ramp and the docking and everything else. It
what
just
about
makes sense.
even going forward as redesigning it? I mean, because the way it's set up,
The boat ramp?
boat ramp, you launch one boat at a time. You got trees in the middle, you've got that you don't need. It should be able, especially if they're going to use now, they can also use parking across the way and pay, I don't know, whatever it is, $5 or $10. Have it designed where that you have lanes where you can back up at least 2 boats at a time.
Well, you could do it now, but people just choose to go down the middle. You know, it's wide enough.
I know, but it's not marked.
Yeah.
There's no,
Agreed.
and when you come around the circle, you stop, there's only one.
Yeah.
That whole area can be redesigned so that it becomes, you've got a ramp on one side and you've got twice as much property that's a seawall.
Yeah.
Let me
You
offer-
could put, if you did it right, you could put more spots to launch the boat.
Agreed.
How about this? Why don't we request from the city what the original grant funding was for around Nick's? Because it's been a while, we got some monies done for that. They clearly weren't spent on that, but at least let's get that as a snapshot. We can review that. We'll get that in addition to the dredging quotes that were had. So we'll have a couple of pieces of information that we can review beforehand, and then we can put that on the agenda for next time to talk specifically we'll get it beforehand, and that way we'll be up to speed on that. And I would encourage my learnings in the past, and Ronnie may already be familiar with it, but all the channels, particularly as we get into the citizen discussions, get as familiar, or keep that other packet that you got last time close at hand, because it'll come in good use.
Yep. Right.
All right. Go ahead.
Nick Overbeck, 8100 Brighton Drive. I may have this skewed, but I believe that Nick's Park was donated to the city under the terms that you cannot charge per boat. But, like Mr. Padova saying, I think a beautification box, I may sound like I'm beating a drum here about this honor box, but, you know, if we only tax citizens, once again, it's the whole county using the only free boat ramp left around. You know, if people from the county put $5 in the shot, it can go to beautify, put lines in, mark, maybe take some trees out if the city will let us. But I know. On top of it, you should see the agreement that the city entered in.
I think that's why we've got to see that, because I've heard as well that
there's a lot of stipulations on it.
That it was for citizens to use, citizens of the city.
Yeah,
right?
so give a sticker or something and then charge $5, whatever it may be. But yes, we can pursue it. It has to be looked into how it was donated also.
Agreed. Right.
Let me just add back to Sal's list here as far as the original agreement on Nick, just so we can understand what it was, in addition to those other two. So that I'll give you that component.
Yeah, there's not going to be, the city doesn't own enough property to store for the boat parking. So you'd be talking a launch fee is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, if they have to pay a launch fee and then they have to go pay for private parking across the street, that might be a little too much. So I guess my point would be, why don't we make it a nice launch area, okay? Put in more areas to launch, more convenient, because we don't have anything to do with the parking anyway. The parking is on private property. So everybody's going to pay for parking, whether you're a Port Richey resident or anybody that comes, because there's no place that the city has except for those 6 or 8 or 10 spots right now, and they're always full. So that's something we got to look at. If you charge to launch, then the people are getting double hit, because now they got to pay to park somebody else over on private property.
I think the term is you can't charge to launch though. You can ask for a beautification donation, maybe.
You could.
And there's a lot of grays that can be investigated. So I would encourage, if you know people that may be familiar with this, I would encourage having conversations on how to deal with the governmental process, because if you haven't, it can be exciting.
Right.
But I think those are good things that will get us going, and we can certainly be busy on this. And I guess the other thing is, I think there was a recognition from the council that this was going to be a protracted process. So one of the things I wanted to float out there was just schedules. Generally, what we've done is this third week is a standing opportunity area, and we were going to talk about this last time. How often do we need to meet? How often would you like to meet? How often do we need to meet? And I wanted to get your input on that and your thought on it, if we need to meet more frequently or less frequently. There's certainly a lot of information that we have to gather in here. I can tell you on a personal basis, my agenda is fairly full here over the next couple months. So meeting more than once would be a challenge, but I would figure out how to make it happen if that was something you guys wanted to do.
I suggest we just try to make it once a month.
Okay.
And because a lot of this, when we get going, we're going to pass on to the council. And until they get back with us, especially if the main project is the dredging, once we push everything over to them, we've got to wait for them to give us some feedback. And if month might be even too frequent with them.
Depending on what's going on.
So we can try now because we're starting. I have no problem with doing it monthly.
Yep, I would agree.
Good.
I motion we meet once a month going forward until
No,
such time as we change.
I'm good for my personal situation. That's fine by me because I think there's a lot of learning we have to do here in the front end. I think from this session, there's a lot of thought that can be put in. How do we engage the community? I just offered a suggestion as an option. I know from a publishing standpoint, Sal, we publish that the Port Authority Board is meeting. We publish the agenda. That's available on the city's website, but there's no other publications of that, or is there? Like in the paper, or I don't know what else.
No, the agenda only needs to be posted. You know, we make postings here for the public here, a physical posting, and then the city website, and of course your copies.
Okay.
But it's not mandatory to post something like that in the newspaper.
Is there an ability on the city's website to kind of highlight that, once we get our act together, that the Port Authority is looking to have, like, the upcoming meeting, getting citizens' input around dredging?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is that something that we could potentially do?
Yeah, the city website can be augmented to post something out like that, and of course once that out, I'm sure it'll reach social media status. We also have the city Facebook as well that could also be posted and then send something out like that.
Okay.
Does the city still have that flyer that used to go out that would do, I don't know whether it was monthly or quarterly, you'd receive a flyer in the mail about what's going on?
The city newsletter is quarterly.
It's quarterly.
Yeah, so it's every 4 months. So the
Maybe-
thing is that
maybe we
might,
could
Do something.
Put a
that-
questionnaire on that for people to fill out and just drop back off?
if you wanted to gear towards the next one, we can find out when the next newsletter will be going out, if we're gonna miss that deadline or not, but I can.
Right, there's
we
probably
can-
that.
yeah.
If we could find out what that schedule was, that would be helpful, and we could bake that into our overall plans.
Yeah.
So I think getting the word out, because certainly you guys are great, but I think this is certainly has a bigger impact.
Yes.
So as many folks, once we get into it, I know it's a little bit in the Storm and Norman period now, but if we don't have more people that are interested in dredging, that'll be an indicator in and of itself.
Before going forward, we do have a motion by Mr. Leeds to meet once a month.
I second.
Oh. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I didn't know we needed a motion for that.
He-
He put it
I
out.
started it, yeah.
Okay.
So,
I didn't get a second. That's fine. I'm just gonna do it at fait accompli. So I was like, you wanna do that? Then we'll do it.
Okay, got it.
All right, that's really all I had, guys. Unless there's, I'll open it up lastly to the citizens. If there's any other input, what we're gonna try to do is kind of formulate a plan on how we wanna move forward. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, would more than welcome them. If you, certainly Sal could forward anything along, but welcome any input. So we want to make this as broad as possible. And other than that, do I have a motion to
Motion
conclude
to
the meeting?
dismiss?
Motion to dismiss?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Great job, guys.